Okay. Confirming, we start at 3:30, right? Yes. Fantastic. So then let's go ahead and get started. Lots to do. I'm not going to belabor this. My name is Marc Dones. I'm the Executive Director of the National Innovation Service. This is my contact information. I put it up in the front so that folks can get it. I will tell you now, I forgot to say this the last 2 times, I am not carrying cards because I'm bad at my job. So this is your chance. If you come ask me for my contact information, I will just say it to you, and then where will we be, you know? NIS is do people need that still? I felt like people were, I saw a picture of being, yep, there we go, great. Okay. The National Innovation Service is a end-to-end shop for creating equitable social systems that actually work. So I've spent the day now talking about equity at different levels, right? So I talked in the morning about like what it would mean to think about it at the organizational level. I spent the last session really walking folks through like what is how to contextualize homelessness inside racial equity and the racist history of this nation, and to think about what it might mean to actively incorporate that into our strategies moving forward. And now I want to talk about some of the work that we have done to do that, right? So the focus of this I don't pay attention when people say things to me like, this is what your talk is called, I'm putting it in the brochure. And that's on me. I recognize that that's just a me thing. So I titled this talk Designing Justice because that's what I was thinking about. It wasn't until I got here that I was like, oh, okay, we're talking about Seattle King County, which is, I'm gonna do. So like, you will hear about that. But it's not what I was thinking the talk was titled. And I say that because like I have a sequence of slides that would not make sense if you thought this talk was titled Homelessness Lessons in Seattle and King County. So I want to start by thinking about like why designing, like why use that framework of design, and what does it mean to think about design. And a couple things sort of come to mind for me. So one, this is a Baldwin quote. I talk about Baldwin a lot. So he said, American history is longer, larger, more various, more beautiful, more terrible than anything anyone has ever said about it. And I think about that a lot. And I think about that in relationship to this, which I showed you in the last talk, right, which is this timeline of America that we've spent, right, like 300 years being aggressively super racist. And during that time, we designed this nation, right? And I'm using that word with really, really explicitness, right? Like it was designed. We wanted certain outcomes, and so we designed certain systems. And the outcomes that we wanted were explicitly racialized, and they were explicitly, right, like for white people and not for everybody else, and particularly not for black folks. And so when we ask ourselves, like, what does it mean that, like, most of us aren't that racist anymore, most of us aren't that racist anymore, and I would challenge you on that too, to be honest, but what does it mean to say that and then to still have systems that produce these incredibly racialized outcomes, right? If I take a snapshot of black mortality rates, particularly maternal mortality rates from 1945, and look at now, the difference is minimal, right? That's not about, like, black women. That's not about black people. That is about this country and how it provides maternal care, right, and OBGYN services to black communities. Full stop, right? So it's a systems question, not a question of whether or not we know better. And what I want to challenge us on today is that knowing better is not enough, right? That like it isn't enough to sit in your office and be like, I'm not a racist. Like, I love that for you. It's a good look. I encourage you to keep doing it. But I also need you to recognize that not being a racist isn't sufficient if you are not designing anti-racist systems around you, right? If you aren't using the power that you have to make a more just reality. I also think about designing. I saw this, so I have a friend who's very, they're very smart and also very whimsical. And they have a bathroom that is decorated in Polaroids. And I don't know where this came from. I've Googled it to no avail. But I really, really like this. It says, sometimes you just need to bury the horse. And I've been thinking about this for I took this for like a year ago. I was thinking about this for like a year. Because it just keeps coming back to me, this idea that like we, right, as a culture, as a society, like keep getting back up on this horse called America and being like, this time it's going to take me someplace different. This time, right, this horse is going to take me to the sunset I'm trying to ride off into. This time, this horse is going to take me to a just reality. And like, I don't know that that's true. I don't have any evidence to suggest, right, that this particular horse is good for much. I have a lot of evidence to suggest that this horse is in fact terrible. Terrible horse. And so what I want us to think about is like when we talk about systems and we talk about systems design, the conversation we need to be having is not about tweaking, it's not about like modifying, it is about whole-scale redoing. Which means, right, that like sometimes you just need to bury the horse. And so like it would be okay. In fact, I'm going to say that it is okay for us to say right now in the safety of this very large recorded room that this country doesn't work for everybody. And if it doesn't work for everybody, I would posit that it doesn't work. And so if that's the case, right, if we are in need of a new America, then it is on us to make it. And that, as I sort of started talking about upstairs, is frankly the great thing about this country, is at its core, it's just all imaginary, and we made it up, and we can make it up again, and we've made it up several times so far, right? So if in 2019, at the dawn of a new century, yada, 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 some of that good jazz, we decide that we need a new country, I think we can actually do that. And so what I want to talk about is how we might design systems that fundamentally reorient us as a nation, as system administrators, as service providers, et cetera, towards communities of color and in a way that doesn't harm folks. So, oh yeah, this is the last little bubble. We designed all this stuff that's bad. Sorry, that was supposed to be up there while I was talking. Okay, so what that means, though, is that folks say, like, okay, so we're going to change the system. And I myself often say we're going to change the system, or we should change the system. And one of the things that has happened in the last several years is, like, talking about changing the system has become, like, very in vogue, right? So, like, everybody is saying, like, let's change the system. I'm a systems thinker. I like to do systems work, right? And like most of it is not actually about systems, right? Like most of it is like, I have built a program. It's not a system, it's a program, right? Systems design is different than program design. Both are important, right? But oftentimes when people tell me that they're doing a systems transformation and I actually like lift up the hood, so to speak, I'm like, you just built a really good program, which is great. I really want to applaud you for that. Great program. Not a system. So when we talk about a system, I want to orient us first, right, so that we can do this work with some containers. So a system is a set of elements or parts that is coherently organized and interconnected in a pattern or structure that produces a set of behaviors often classified as its function or purpose, right? Oh, purpose is cut off. It says purpose. So I want to be really clear about that definition because this immediately means that like systems don't do a very important thing that programs do, and we often, like in our rush to design a better system, do not pay attention to that difference. And the difference is that systems produce outcomes and not outputs. And I know that's like super wonky and boring, and you're like, but where is the like there, right? An output is something that I can buy. It's a widget, right? So if I want more units of housing, I can buy more units of housing. Ending homelessness is not a widget. That's why this is important. outcomes are behavioral changes. Meaning, right, that if I look at something and say, what's the behavior that I'm seeing right now, it would be different in a system, right, that was designed to produce a different behavioral outcome. What this means, right, is that what we understand from the data is that folks experiencing homelessness, particularly black and brown folks, trans women, et cetera, are often housed and then returned to homelessness, right? Sometimes voluntarily, for reasons that we don't understand. That's behavior. If you want a different outcome there, you actually need a different system design. So if you want to safely, stably house marginalized communities, you need a system that can do that. Which means you need to do systems thinking, right? So that's a discipline that looks at subunits, right? And a set of elements that interact to produce that behavior. And it means functionally that instead of isolating smaller and smaller parts, you're interested in expanding to take into larger and larger sets of interactions. So why should we use it, right? We privilege outcomes rather than intent, outcomes over stated goals. It allows us to look at both the sum and the parts and view structure as a source of behavior. This slide changed shape on me, don't know why. I want to be really clear here that the outcome over intent is the most important thing about system dynamics and engineering in a system space. Because, and this is where those of you who've seen me speak already today are like, okay, where's the thing about race? Because, again, I spend a lot of time with people who are like, as a non-racist, me, Timothy, the non-racist, right? I don't care. That's what being a systems thinker allows me to do. I love that you're not a racist. Your intent doesn't matter because the system you run destroys black lives. That's what matters here. And you can sit around and pontificate on not being racist as long as you'd like. Please do not call me for that part of it. Call me when you want to have a conversation about building a system that is in line with that pontificating. And that's what I want to talk about, right? Is like, how do you do that? And so, and this is where I get to programs, right? So like, even when we design solutions that may work for black folks or brown folks or trans women, right, or any historically marginalized population, those programs at some point are going to try to scale, and they're going to hit a system that doesn't actually care about black people or trans women or brown folks, right? And so you're never actually going to hit that sort of escape velocity that you're chasing in every single program design. And so that's why we see, right, like over and over and over again, these pockets where it's like, oh, like this particular initiative does incredible shit in Harlem and you cannot, for the life of you, get it to work in the Bronx. Because the specific constraints of programs are always going to run into systems. So a key shift, right, is that we no longer try to pilot small program-level interventions. We confront the issue at scale from the start. That's my last, like, very dry theoretical thing before I get you into, like, okay, so how do you do this? But I really want to be clear that, like, the theory is important here because what I will not have is, like, you all go home and are like, I'm going to pilot this at my agency. No. Don't do that. I will find you. Transform your agency or don't. But don't build a pilot program. It's a waste of time. Waste of time. Okay. So this is what it looks like when you want to redesign a system. So the work that I want to take us through today is work that my team did in King County. So King County houses Seattle, right? For those of you who don't know, Seattle has the third largest population experiencing homelessness in the nation. Lots and lots and lots of unsheltered folks. And as with most major areas, there are disproportionalities in that. So the folks who are experiencing homelessness are majority black and majority native. That is par for the course everywhere. It's par for the course there. When we look at the disproportionality, though, it's particularly intense, right? So we're talking about, I believe the region has gone down to like, I want to say 5 or 6% black, but then it is north of 30% in terms of population experiencing homelessness. So it's a really extreme disproportionality. So it's like, it's one of those things where it's like, you know, if you're black in King County, your housing is insecure. Like those are just kind of things that I can say, right? What we did in order to redesign the system is we started with nothing. And I want to sort of say that that's really important because when you're doing this kind of equity work and you're saying like, okay, I want to redesign and I want to rebuild and I want to blah, 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 there's often this rush, and Amanda talked about this, there's this rush to do shit, just to like start doing stuff, and like, please don't do that. Like, please slow all the way down. And be like, hey, if I knew how to fix this, I probably would have fixed it already. Like, let's all just be really humble about that. Like, if we knew how to do this, like, Just America thing, we probably would have at this point. So maybe we just don't know how. So then there's information gathering. And information gathering at this juncture needs to be structural. So what we looked at was org charts, policy positions, regulations, interviews. Like, we're like, what are you using to manage this? And how does it account for black and brown folks, right? Like, where in this structure have you designed anything that is about these folks, right? Our first diagnosis was that there was no shared theory of change. So we saw like this incredibly fragmented system, and there was no theory of change that actually bound it all together. Then we did staff interviews, a discovery workshop. I'm going to talk about these things. And our second and third order diagnoses, and I use this word of diagnosis really intentionally, right? Because it is a discovery process, and it's really about like not saying that like what this community is experiencing is what every community is experiencing. One of the things about homelessness, right, is it's national pressures that create homelessness, but the solutions are often very local. We can talk about that. But so our second and third diagnoses were that there was distributed authority and functional confusion. And then we took all that, and this is the part that really matters, and so this is what I want to spend the most time on, is we took all that and we then went out to folks experiencing homelessness and said, tell us what would work. And that's the magic, by the way. You just go talk to people. I hate to break it to you. I want it to be more complicated. I want there to be some sort of secret sauce here. But you talk to people and you listen to them and you believe them when they say that they know what to do with their lives. And I think it's in the words of my people, it's just kind of funny how we like think that it's okay, right? We've built a system where the majority of folks who operate it hate it, and the majority of people who use it hate it. It just doesn't make any sense, right? Like, everybody can't be wrong here. And what we do, right, is like we obsess over like, well, like, you know, what is the funder telling me to do, or what is the, like, and we won't listen, right, just listen to the people who are trying to do the thing and be like, okay, so what is it, right, that would be helpful here, and how can I provide that? And what I want to be really clear about from an equity perspective, right, is that black and brown folks, trans folks, et cetera, have survived in this nation for so long by figuring out what to do. It's not mysterious to us how to survive. It's just not resourced, or there are 1,000 other things in the way, right? So it is really, really important that, like, again, this isn't about like there's knowledge that people are keeping from us. It's that communities that have been at the center of harm for a long time actually do have strategies to survive, and we resource everything but those strategies. And when we ask people, like, oh, like, tell me what you need, we don't really listen, right? I see 1,001 sort of tools for like, oh, we're gonna like design your care plan together, right? But like, we're not. What's gonna happen is you're gonna tell me what you think you need, and I'm gonna be like, we don't do that. So here's what we do, and I think that you need this. So, I'm really glad we spent this time together, though. And I value you. We just actually have to change. We have to actually say that when people show up and tell us what they need, that's true. And there's no reason to believe that they're lying. What we know from decades at this point of perverse psychological studies is that there's very little incentive to lie, and most people don't lie that often. It's why when people lie a lot, we diagnose it as pathology. So like, there's no reason to believe, right, that people would show up and be like, I'm gonna lie about my needs to you for no reason. That's not a thing. So what we did was we went out and we worked with about 207, I think is the exact number, folks, majority of whom were folks experiencing homelessness. We also worked with about 40 frontline staff because we wanted to understand, right, like what are the things that people experiencing homelessness need, and then on the staff side, what would be helpful to deliver those things, right? I want to be really clear, and this is a twofold thing. So this morning I talked about how, like, I'm kind of like getting to this point in my career where I'm a little anti-data. And part of that has to do with that I really just want us not to always have to say, like, this is proven beyond a doubt and I've like talked to all the people and yada, yada, yada. We should just be able to believe people, right? The other thing is that I want us to be able to think through this in a way that doesn't put people in boxes as like, I need to be able to look at people's whole experiences. And so one of the first things I would say is that when you're doing this kind of work, and I mentioned this morning, you have to shift your analysis out of the HUD categories and into how people live, right? So what that means, right, is like I don't need to run a group on vets. I need to run a group on refugees. I need to run a group on black folks. I need to run a group on trans folks. I need like vets will be in all those groups, right? But like when we look at like the salient identity, like where are people, like what does the system recognize and either punish or reward? It is not veteran status or family status outside of a couple incentives that we built. In this nation, how a system recognizes you is your gender identity and your race. Like those are the things that we designed the country to do. And so it does them really well. And if we want to push out of that, then we need to focus really directly on those things. So with folks, what we ask them are first, like tell us about your goals. So we had this sheet and we asked, we like did a bunch of, we're a shop that combines anthropology, design methodology, et cetera. So we do a lot of like, talk to us about your things and fill this thing out and then talk to us some more. So we asked folks, what are your goals, near and long term? What are your service priorities? What are the things you're looking for? And what are your provider preferences? Real basic stuff. Stuff that nobody asked anybody. Which is just stressful for me, right? And again, I just want to be really clear, like this isn't rocket science. It's literally just like you have to have an understanding of like what it is that people need and then abstract that into system design. From there, we asked folks to talk to us about like what are their, who are the folks they interact with most, who are the 3 to 4 most helpful, and how do they help you? This network mapping, which is what this is called in a fancy sense, network mapping gave us a sense of what it was that people were actually seeking, right? So when you combine these two things, what you get to is what people need, right? And what they are looking for, and how they evaluate whether or not that thing has been good for them. And I know this is super boring, but what's wacky is nobody ever asks black people if they like a thing. I mean, it just doesn't happen. I mean, like, truly, right? Like, no one ever designs a thing for a marginalized community and then follows up. Mostly, what we get is like, this is what we're providing everybody, and if you don't like it, then I would like you to leave. So, like, this is, it feels really, like, basic, but unfortunately, that's where we are. We need to do basic stuff in order to ascertain what people need and how to build from it. One of the things that was surprising to me about this is that, so the thing that folks were looking for most, not surprisingly, was housing. But the second thing, the second most important, any guesses on what that was, actually? Yes. It was emotional support. I'm really glad you knew that already. Is that because you do the work? Great. Neat. Thank you for being here. But, right, like that's not what we designed for at all. We do not design our systems to focus on supporting people. We design our systems to do a whole lot of other stuff. But what folks said to us, right, was like, I'm in a crisis and it would be great if someone could spend some time with me acknowledging that I'm in that crisis and not just click through a bunch of things, right? I want to be super clear that, like, how do I say this? No, I'm just going to say it. If we're in a housing constrained environment, which we are, right? Market forces have constrained housing. We can talk about that another time because there are a lot of things we could do to fix that. Some of them are socialism. It's fine. I said it. You didn't say it, so later on you don't have to blame anyone else but me. So we're in a housing constrained environment. What we understand, right, is that like when we talk to folks and they're like, housing is the thing, obviously, right? And we can't provide housing. Then the other things that we are like, oh, we can provide this, that, and the other, that people aren't asking for, it just seems like we're not listening. Right? So we've built a system that like actually traumatizes people when they come into contact with it, because they say, I need this or this, and then we say like, cool, we're gonna give you this thing instead. And I actually fundamentally believe that like if I have to choose between three systems, right? A system that ends homelessness and is equitable, a system that doesn't end homelessness and is equitable, and a system that is inequitable and not ending homelessness, just the middle one is still improvement. And if we acknowledge the fact that our current systems do harm, in addition to not getting everybody housed, then we have to change. We just have to, right? We have to be able to own the fact that like, if we want to stop doing harm, if we want to figure out how to work with marginalized communities, then there are just strategies we have to employ, and some of them are listening. Okay. So we also asked folks to talk about the services that they wanted. We asked folks to group those into service areas. Then we asked folks to talk about how they prioritize those things, what were the barriers to access, and if they had providers that they knew of that provided those things, why or why not go to a given provider, right? So if I know you do something and I need it, but I choose to go to you instead, like what's making that decision, right? Again, oftentimes it came down to like, oh, if I go over here, I'm gonna get the kind of support that like makes sense to me. With providers, right, we ask them similar questions. So things, what can you help with? What are you good at? What are your expectations? This came up, I think, when Jason was talking about like just sort of like, people who are doing service work are often like, and I sit in these rooms where administrators talk about service workers, and it's like, well, why can't, they shouldn't do this work if they can't like handle the abuse. And it's like, well, that doesn't make any sense. That's not how we talk about people, right? And so like to have an understanding that like, I deserve to have an expectation about like, I need to be treated like a person too, right? This can't just be like one big circular trauma pool, right? The other thing that I want to acknowledge is that like we don't provide, like we put a lot of folks in very, very, very traumatizing positions in the terms of secondary trauma and the kinds of stuff that we're asking folks to manage without the kind of support that they need in order to do that well. And when I say that, what I mean, and I want to be really clear about this, I'm not saying everyone needs a clinical degree. I'm saying everyone needs clinical supervision. That's different, right? Clinical supervision is just job therapy, right? Like, so who's a social worker here? That's right. So for those of you who are not social workers or clinicians of other kinds, right? Clinical supervision in the mental health space is literally like at the end of the day, or once a week, or bi-weekly if you think you're real hot shit. You sit down with someone who may not even work with you, by the way. Like you can outsource clinical supervision, and you sit down with them and you're like, here are all the ways my job ruined my life this week because I didn't feel adequate, or I didn't know what I was doing, or this person cried and I felt like I was a jerk, or you just like, it's someplace to put all the work stuff. And we put people in these incredibly complicated positions, right? Call it case management, and then don't offer the support that we would offer that same position if a social worker was in it. It doesn't make sense. So like, if we're asking folks, if people say to us, I need emotional support, and we say, cool, we're giving you a case manager, but we're not going to support that case manager, and we're going to pay her $23,000 a year, so she's definitely going to quit after 6 months, and she's going to be traumatized, and she's already kind of on the verge of homelessness herself, so like, oh, I don't know about all that, right? Like, what is all of this? And this is systems. This is a system design issue. This is not about any one actor in that array, right? It is about how do I employ young black and brown women to counsel other young black and brown folks at an amount of money that like we are not far away from each other, right? We are one left turn from sharing the same seat. And we're not providing the kind of clinical support, again, through supervision, and we're not providing the kind of monetary support to say, like, also, you can stay in this job for a while, right? You ain't got to be on the hunt. How then, right, would a system designed in that way actually provide the stable emotional support that people show up asking for? It doesn't make sense. And I'm going through this in this obnoxiously slow way because I want you to see really clearly that it's not an actor. No one person in this is doing the wrong thing. It is the way the system is architected, and so it compels behavior. Behavior is the outcome. Does that make sense? Great. So, and I want to be really clear, right, that like, if our resource scarcity is real, and it may or may not be, I'm a huge fan of saying it's probably not as scarce as we think it is, just to be clear, if our resource scarcity is real, then we actually have an obligation to provide the best possible care because we can't have people returning to homelessness. Anyone who touches our system has to be stably housed at the end of their journey with us, and they have to stay housed. There is no other option. So providing inadequate, disparate care is actually, if we believe our own scarcity myths, criminal. So investing in those frontline staff and saying, okay, we're going to pay you $75K, and we're going to keep you, and we're going to support you so that you can support people? Who said, oh my God? Wouldn't that be wacky and wild? But that's system design, and it incents behavior, right? So one of the other things, well, I'll get there. So we also asked providers to talk about programs and services in their organization. We asked them to say what needs improvement or what's doing well. With the things that need improvement, we asked folks to tell us, right, is it a barrier to access? Is it, so barrier to access on the customer side, meaning like I'm not on a bus line, so no one can get here, or is it a delivery challenge, so on the provider side, meaning we have not had a consistent director for 5 years, and so I don't know what we do. And people were like super honest, right, about those things. Again, most of them pointed towards structural issues in the way that the system was designed. I want to highlight, well, actually, hang on. I'm going to pull something into this. You're watching me make a decision in real time. Don't you feel lucky? While I'm doing this, I want to highlight that when we talk about systems incenting behavior, I can't stress enough that it really just drives what people do in their day. And so I think the best example for this is outreach, actually. What's the most common metric for outreach? Somebody tell me. Number of people. What's the other most common? Yes. So the two most common are contacts and number of people. What are you supposed to be doing in those contacts? Whatever. Just literally, kind of whatever. You're just supposed to engage, right? Engage to do what? Provide services. Okay, cool. If I come talk to you in the morning and I'm offering this stuff and you're like, I don't want that, and I come back in the afternoon and I'm like, still got this stuff. Is that annoying? Do I even want to do it? No, because you told me no 5 hours ago. Nothing has changed. I have nothing new. You are still the same person. I don't have what you need. I don't know why we're doing this, right? So what we heard from folks experiencing homelessness was, hey, this person comes and kind of harasses me all day. And I know that I can't tell them to fuck off because like one day they might have housing and I want them to like me when that happens. And then we heard from outreach workers who were like, I wish I could stop bothering these people. I have nothing new. And like the people who would like to sit with me, I can't sit with because I need to move on to the next person. That's how that's a behavior, again, that everybody knows is the wrong thing to do. And when you talk to folks, right, and again, so I'm going to bring this back to marginalized communities, right? When you talk to black and brown folks, when you talk to LGBTQ folks, one of the things that they highlight as why they are or are not successful is a relationship, right? That like moving into a system that they don't trust is often relational. It's not because the service type has changed, it's because they trusted someone. So like if we're trying to design towards building trust, if we want communities to have different outcomes, then we actually need to listen to the things that they say to us and say like, okay, I can push in that direction. Okay, so for this community, what we came up with as like how they needed to focus was they needed a system-wide theory of change, they needed to consolidate their resources, they needed to center the customer at all levels, that's folks experiencing homelessness, they need to prioritize economic stability, the digital transformation, redesign intake, expand health services, blah, 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 other stuff, right? This is not the stuff that is for every community, this was for this community, and I want to be really clear about that. What I want to highlight, though, is not what they are, but how they work. So if you're doing systems design, you're not looking at things that are sequential. They're like, oh, we'll do this, then this, then this, then this, then this, or you can pick, we'll do 3 but not 2, right? These are necessarily interconnected and reinforcing. So like, if you're thinking about how to build an equitable system, what you need to be doing is asking yourself, right, like, again, not to pilot a thing, but to say, what are the ways in which I can design, so if I change this thing, it drives this thing which I change, and then and it becomes a whole-scale transformation. And then I want to contextualize all this, as I often do, with the voices of folks who are having the experience, right? And so I'm just going to play, I hope I'm going to play. Actually, I didn't even really test my sound. That's bad. That's a thing that people normally do. Give me 1 second. Well, let's see what happens. I want to play a video of a person that we worked with in King County. And I just want to sort of tie it all in. I think this will work.
I was 16, and I was pregnant, and I had my baby. I lived with my grandmother for a little bit, but she ended up getting sick, and I had to go. So I found this landlord on the east side that allowed me to move in for like 1,800. Well, it wasn't the best area, so I kind of ran into the wrong people, started dating the wrong people, and I ended up an addict for about 8 months, selling and doing drugs, and ended up losing everything that I had. I lost the house. I almost lost my son.
No, it's actually coming through that.
In hospitals, anywhere well lit, I would go to trap houses, I would do drugs to stay up, only just so I, didn't have to fall asleep with him where we were. It was hard because I hadn't had an addiction at that point, and I knew that I needed help, but I didn't want to say that because I felt like it was going to restrict me from being at certain places. There's a coordinated entry, not in Seattle, but in Tacoma, for the Tacoma area. So I tried to do that. Months went by, there was nothing, no help from them. I'm not a fan of coordinated entry. I feel like they're very invasive. I feel like they gave me a lot of anxiety. Took about 7 or 8 months for them to find me housing in Bothell, which was like kind of a shelter. It was like 2 girls share an apartment with their children, and that was cool. And then a couple months later, I ended up moving into Avondale here in Redmond. So this is Avondale. So this is our office right here where our case management is. That's my apartment right there. There's a little pumpkins out there. Yeah, there's a little park, a little dip off to the left. This is actually really nice. I love this place. I don't want to leave. I just kind of stick to myself, but they have community dinners every Wednesday. So sometimes we'll go do that. I mean, it's going to be a good community regardless of this is Redmond. It costs, like, my apartment, when I signed my lease, it was like $2,000 something that it would be normally. That's the goal, though. I want to be able to pay $2,000 in rent if I wanted to, you know? Case management for me is like the biggest part of my rehabilitation from homelessness and from being an addict. Learning how, I didn't learn those things from my parents. They worked really hard to get me an anxiety blanket so that I didn't have to call 911 to the house all the time. I needed a driver's license because I'm 22 and I didn't have a driver's license. But I'm scared to drive. So they got me my license. You know, they got me classes at driver's ed. I wanted to do my GED, they paid for that. So pretty much anything that I have, I want to work on my credit. So we're working on getting a credit card account and getting a credit card and learning how to be fiscally responsible. They do budgets with me, you know. So that type of stuff really helps me out. I make pretty good money where I work, so now I do budgets every month, and I'm learning how to save my money and spend my money correctly. You know, that's still a barrier. That's still hard for me, but because, you know, when you're coming off of being homeless, you don't know how to save. Saving is not in our nature like that, because it's also always survival. I don't think that ever really goes away, or it won't go away for a long time. It's the survival mentality. And so we have to, like, literally train ourselves how to live in a normal society. You know, or for me, first getting into housing and having my own house drove me nuts. I didn't know what to do with it. I could not sit still. It was driving me bonkers, not bouncing around or having to move or feeling like I don't know what my next move is, you know? But that survival mentality. And everybody told me that I needed to sit still for a minute. That's what stability feels like, you know? That was a new feeling for me.
I wish it were rocket science, but it just isn't. I mean, like, it's just like, you know, that's, I mean, by the way, from a clinical perspective, that's just complex PTSD, right? And, like, the thing that gets you through complex PTSD is being stable. and having those supports, right? And, like, if we are able, as a field, as a set of system administrators, right, to turn towards people, ask them what they need, and believe them, then we can fix this problem. If, however, right, that is what we don't choose to do, right? If we don't choose to turn towards communities of color and say, what do you need? I'm going to just do it. Then this is just going to keep going, and it will probably get worse. So this is my ugliest slide. I'm sorry. So what I want us to do is leave a charity model, right? I talk about this all the time, but we have a charity model right now. Charity models came into being from food pantries, right? Which then we added clothing, then we added food, right, to become a soup kitchen, and that essentially is it's still our shelter model, right? It's just sort of like, oh, we're going to give you this stuff that is a Band-Aid to the actual underlying thing, right? Instead, I need us to recognize, right, that, like, we actually are dealing with an iceberg, right, where homelessness is the tip of it. Underneath, sure, we have poverty, but at the core, what we're actually dealing with is structural inequity, right? And for those of you who were with me previously, we know that because poverty is not actually the driver of homelessness. It is the inequity. Poverty doesn't correlate with homelessness the way that race does. So I need us not to do this aggressive focusing on mostly homelessness, sometimes on poverty, right? Instead, what I want us to do is shift and to think about having an equity model. And in an equity model, we would start with this understanding that society is predatory. We've built a nation that is out to get some folks. And that's just true. And again, right, like if we're cool with burying the horse, then we're fine with saying that. Like, you know, if I don't need to get back up on this horse and ride it someplace, I can be like, it's a bad horse. If we think about that, right, what that means is that we shift our orientation towards solution space. So we understand, right, that like a solution to homelessness is housing, a solution to poverty is like we should probably fix capitalism, And a solution to inequity is that we should address racism and misogyny. And it turns out that we've already done that in one space to some degree, right? So we have housing first in the housing space because we spent a long time walking up a very steep hill to say that nobody should have to prove they're ready for housing. That's not a thing, right? We all know that's not a thing, right? Not seeing enough heads nodding. Okay. But, right, like what we could do is understand that in the space of capitalism, right, we need to evaluate the function of capital. And so when I was talking about network impoverishment in the last conversation, right, and talking about how it is the lack of material capital that separates people from the experience of an inconvenience and the experience of homelessness, right, the only fix for that is capital. And if we are afraid, right, if we say that like, oh, cash interventions, right, da-da-da-da, like all the things that we say that are deeply racist, then we are not addressing the problem. The problem in communities of color is not that people don't want to be housed. The problem is that there is a material deficiency created by 300 years of structural racism, and so it is only material solutions, right, that are actually going to address that. And then on the racism and misogyny front, like we could think about truth and reconciliation. That's just my tip. I don't know, like y'all don't have to buy me on that, but like it would be great to have a conversation in this country about the shit that happened. Okay. It's late in the day. But the point is, right, is that we gotta burn all that down. Just like it's gotta go away. And how we're going to do that is by focusing on addressing inequity rather than addressing the symptoms of inequity. And you all listen to that very, very, very procedural, but like how you do that is you just ask people what they need and you do it, right? So if we double down on that, then we can burn the whole thing down. And we'll just be left with a dope place to live. So how do we change, right? I'm actually going to skip this. This is like a reveal that I do where I'm like, oh, you can connect to your workforce investment boards. You can connect with employers. You can do, like, summer job programs are stupid. Sorry. Summer job programs are hella dumb. If you need a job in the summer, you know when else you need a job? The whole year round. Like, I love y'all with your, like, summer jobs. That's ending gang violence. It is not ending gang violence. Because my man needs a job in August the same way he needs a job in September. So I don't know what, and like this idea that like, oh, well, they're back to school in September. Are they? If that was what we were dealing with, no, right? So when people say to you, I need money the whole year round, a summer job does not fix that. Just want to be real clear. But we should still do them. We should just do them better. 21st century Voc Tech, we just gotta like prioritize like getting people trained in skills that matter, right? I will say this. I love you all. I say this every time. I love everybody. I don't, but I do. Soft skills training is racist. It's super racist, in fact. So when I say, right, that like people need to be trained in skills to have jobs, I mean they need to be engineers, right? They need to be able to code. Google doesn't care about your soft skills. They just don't. Like Google doesn't care about your degree. They don't care where you came from. They care, are you a brilliant engineer? Do you have those skills? And they will pay you more money than God if you do. Same with Facebook, same with all these tech companies that we say we love. Soft skills, like, right? So what a soft skill is like how to shake a hand, how to make the right amount of eye contact. These are all cultural norms. There is no right or wrong way to do them. Soft skills are normed on what white people think is the right way to interact. So all of soft skills training is how to make a white person comfortable. None of it is actually how we just do us. I need you to know this. Because to be super clear, right, like, you know, frankly, a lot of so for those of us who are people of color, who here has been told that they are too loud once upon a time? Okay. So like, I get told I'm loud all the time. Mark, you're yelling. Why are you whispering? We have a different idea of the appropriate volume because we come from different places, and that's fine. So all of this soft skill stuff needs to be, all those dollars need to be transitioned into hard skills because that's what people employ. And the big dollars are not there for soft skills. Okay. So predictive hotspot training, invest in your own workforce. That's the last one that I'll harp on. Oh my God, that long run about like take your case managers and pay them $75K, invest in them, give them the right supervision. That was not just for fun. You need to do that. Especially because the majority of those folks are black and brown and mostly women. So you cannot come talk to me and be like, I'm Timothy, the good anti-racist in my office, and have a workforce of young black and brown women making $20,000 a year in greater New York. I can't do it. Okay. All right, but how, like the real change actually is in cash transfer. It's in just saying like, do you need money? Then we're gonna give you money. The real change is in debt buying. $5,000 is a lot of agencies' paper budget. You could pay off a lot of debt with $5,000 because a lot of folks are carrying between $500 and $1,000 of debt. That's keeping them out of things. So I'm saying like repurpose your paper budget, go digital, be green. And buy people's debt. And generally speaking, it's direct relief, right? So like if somebody needs a thing, do the thing, right? Don't provide a set of conversations about the thing. If you need a refrigerator before you can move into an apartment, strategizing with you about how to get a refrigerator is not helpful. You know how to go to Sears. Is Sears still open? Shit. Okay. I am on a lot of cold medicine. You know how to go to Sears. I know how to go to Sears, right? Like we both know how to get a refrigerator. The issue is not knowledge, it is money. And then finally, prevention and not reaction, right? So we need to be able to meet people before they enter the system, right? So I want us to rethink the purpose and function of shelter. How are we actually saying, like, so in a world, right, where we redesign our system and incentivize it differently, we did this in healthcare about 20 years ago, actually, we started this process, where we started figuring out how to pay hospitals to keep beds empty. Y'all remember that? We redesigned the entire healthcare system under the fundamental premise that ICUs should be vacant, that admission rates to hospitals should be low, not high, and that a successful healthcare system would have fewer people in it, and we paid for that. I want us to design a system that pays for shelters to be empty. I'm not saying shelters shouldn't exist. Hospitals are still open. People still gotta go someplace sometimes. But what I am saying is we do know how to pay for empty beds. And it's a system decision. Finally, I just want to say, so this is Angela Davis. I think about this a lot. You have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world, and you have to do it all the time. So like, we have to actually, like, that idea that shelters are paid to be empty is radical. The idea that we would just do debt buying is radical. Some of it is socialism. But like if we don't start doing this stuff, then what? We can't just say it's too big to do. We have a responsibility, and we have to act. Some final thoughts, right? So I talked about this morning, but like we have to learn the difference between service advocacy and organizing. We need to focus on service and on organizing. I don't want people showing up and talking for people anymore. Like, and there was the brilliant comment by the young person who said, like, even in the case of folks who you think can't speak, right? Like, often we are also speaking, they said, right? And I really want us to like organize people to communicate their own needs, not to speak on behalf of folks, right? We need to think about our role as gatekeepers. Amanda talked about this, but I really, really, really want to push us to leave behind this notion that like there's a scarce amount of resources, and if I don't modulate how you use it, then you're going to misuse it and blah, 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 blah. We really have to understand that like if we are who we say we are, if we mean what we say we mean, then we can't get into these positions of authority and then gatekeep those who we claim to serve. We are all complicit, right? We are in a very nice hotel. When you do Google Maps to a hotel, it tells you the rate that evening? Bruh. How is anybody here? No. Being here is complicit. The amount of money it takes to stand in this room, the amount of money being spent on y'all sitting here is complicitness in a notion of scarcity. This money could be anywhere, and it could be with people who need it, and instead, I'm up here doing this thing. And it's cool, I love to hear me talk. I hope you have found it somewhat enjoyable. But at the end of the day, I would love more to be able to retire because the problem was over. That's what I actually want to do. So when Amanda was like, if we could take our conference budgets and spend that time with community or direct that money towards community, I would love to see the no conference year. And what could we do with all the conference money? It would be bananas. I want us to think about how we move from racial equity to racial justice, right? So equity is about the future. It's about not being able to predict how you'll die in this country. Justice is about owning and acknowledging and dealing with the fact that we've already killed some people. If we're going to actually move forward, at some point we need to reckon with that past. And then finally, and I'm stealing from Amanda, but she's not here, she said this one time, the work has to feel less like charity and more like justice. One of my favorite quotes is, if you are here to help me, I am not interested. I want to work with you only if you recognize that your liberation is tied to mine. In this country, where someone, I guarantee you, is sleeping at the foot of the building we are in, we are all deformed by that reality. None of us are getting away being like, cool, and I'm cool, right? We are all walking with that trauma. We are all walking with that dissonance. And that's damage. And in liberating somebody else, we become free from that. So our liberation is mutually connected. It is not me helping you. It is not charity. It is that I want to be free as well. I'm glad y'all like that, because that's it. Thank you. Again, my name is Mark. This is my contact information. Thank you very much. I have no idea if there's time for questions, because again, a lot of cold medicine, and I don't know when this is supposed to end, so somebody tell me if I can. Oh, wow, I have half an hour? Wow, that's not what I had thought, but that's great. Y'all should, I guess, get into Alka-Seltzer. Okay, question time. If there are questions, there don't have to be questions. Yes?
How did you come about to bring into establishing your program?
My agency? Brief history. I said this last time. I started my career at a time when the country was black, right? And when I mean that, what I say is that the president was black, the governor that I worked for was black, The secretary who I reported to was a black woman, and the assistant secretary who held my portfolio was a black woman. And so we were having conversations at that time that were about how we as a state could better respond to black and brown communities, as if it was just like that was the conversation, right? And it wasn't until I left that role and was like, oh, other people don't talk about this, right? That I realized that that's what I wanted to be doing. And I didn't talk about this, but I was fortunate enough in that first position to get to redesign an entire youth violence framework, or youth violence prevention framework. And in that, we started with the same sort of idea, like, we don't know what's happening, we know young black and brown men are committing crimes, we don't know why, and we don't know how to help, right? And so what we started doing, and I call this, I say if I ever write a memoir, I'll call this period riding in cars with felons. Because I went out and I just rode around with a bunch of young men who had like done some violent stuff. And just was like, why, right? Like, what happened, yada, yada, yada. And it turned out, right, that it was like housing instability and hunger and a lack of employment, which is why I was like, these summer job programs are not it, because if you are hungry in August, you are hungry in October. We redesigned that program, and we dropped non-fatal shootings statewide by 61%. And I understand viscerally, and from the data and from my own experience as a researcher, that if you talk to people, do what they ask, the thing you're trying to fix actually gets fixed. So like, I'm sorry, just for those of you who are not public health nerds, a 61% drop in non-fatal shootings is actually unheard of. Like, that remains one of the proudest accomplishments of my life. But it's not my accomplishment, right? It's literally just like, I talked to young men and they said, it's money, bruh. And I said, cool. I'm gonna design this whole program around making sure that you are paid for things, right? So you want young black and brown men to go to school, you gotta pay them to be there. Literally. And I know that sounds whack, but like, when you are talking again about the material deficiencies in these communities, young men are dropping out of school to try to get money. It's not rocket science, It's not rocket science, right? If I drop out to go earn money so that me and my family can stay housed, you are not gonna sell me back into going to school by telling me I can make more money in 10 years. I don't care about 10 years from now. So we built the entire program. We paid young men to go to school. We paid them to get their GED. We paid them to go to therapy. Just whatever we were looking to have done, we were like, cool, we'll pay for it. And that's how we drove this violence reduction. And it was that sort of like built in me this desire to just like continually listen to people and then put the thing in place that they told me to do. And so that's what I've been trying to do. And I was fortunate enough to then work in a series of places that allowed me to do that. And then through a bizarre turn of events, I was working at a company last year that halfway through the year decided it was actually a startup lab and decided that my department was a startup. I was not really involved in those conversations, but all of a sudden I was running a company and it's very confusing. I don't know what I'm doing. It's great. Sorry. Little side rant about violence prevention. Yes. So the question was about substance use disorder. A couple things. So one, all of our best data on folks experiencing homelessness indicates that substance use disorder is elevated but not dominant, right? So I wouldn't use it to model responses to the population because I think that data-wise, like majority of folks are not living with substance use disorders. Two, specific to the question in terms of like, oh, there's this behavior that if we don't address, then they'll sort of bomb out of housing. One, I would say, again, just on substance use disorder, what we understand is that a lot of middle class and wealthy folks also have substance use disorder, also have severe mental health conditions, right, and do not experience homelessness and do not bomb out of housing because they own it or it's their parents, right? And so it is, in that case, truly, again, a material resource that keeps people housed. I'm not saying, right, that like housing devoid of service is, or mental health connection is sufficient, but I am saying that like, one is better than the other. Housed is better than unhoused. On the other aspect in terms of, economic and material support. So I think, again, if I listen to the what that young woman said to us, right, like, hey, I'm learning how to budget, I'm learning how to do these things, and I'm learning them now because I've been in a state of crisis and in a state of trauma for so long, and that survival instinct of like, I got $5, like, what am I gonna eat? Let me make sure that something happens, right? And she's saying, like, I got housed, people provided these material supports to me, and then I had a case manager who's working with me to do this stuff, right? So to me, it really is, if we transition to a model where we are really focused on providing that service support and that long-term support. And again, we did this in the health system. So I don't know if folks are familiar with Money Follows the Person. It's a Medicaid model that we did about 15 years ago. Anyone know Money? Okay. So Money Follows the Person is this idea that like if you are in need of service and you're receiving Medicaid support in an MFP authorized system, if you switch providers, the money that was in their budget to treat you follows you, instead of just saying like, this provider gets $50,000 and whoever they help that year is who they help. They will get $50,000 if they help $50,000 worth of people, right? So an MFP model actually would allow you to say, you have a case manager and it is your case manager regardless of which part of the service system you're in. So imagine, dream with me, a world where someone calls 211 and says, I am in danger of experiencing homelessness, and they're assigned a case manager. Say the worst thing happens and they actually do come to experience homelessness. The case manager is still with them. Say that in 3 months they're housed again and they still have the same case manager to help them stabilize in that unit. It's really easy to build, right? And to your question about like how do we make sure that like when we're providing material supports to people, we are also providing them with whatever else they need in order to not need to activate that again and again, that is possible if we listen to people's requests for continuity in their support and provide that. Yeah.
How did you get funders to support this incentivizing staying in school or any of the other initiatives? What was your strategy to provide funding?
So the question was, how did I work with funders? In the case of the violence prevention the work that we did, that wasn't me, that was Governor Deval Patrick, who is one of the finest politicians this country has ever produced, who got a weird blank check from the legislature in a way that I don't understand. What I will say, though, is that blank check happened one time, and then we had to build a model and validate that model. So what we did is all of the work that we did was based on ethnographic work that I did, right? And then the best sort of neuropsych models of young people that we had available at the time. And then we validated the program through a randomized control trial and said, like, look, like we've seen this drop in, non-fatal shootings, et cetera, but all of that is correlation, not causation. In order to get to causal data, what we did was say, we have this is particularly wonky, but like, so we built the program around what we called proven risk young people. So those were young people with records of violent acts, right? It wasn't, oh, you're at risk because you're truant or whatever. It was like, no, we know that you do stuff, right? And so what I designed in that program was, we said to providers rather, we are paying you to work with Bill, right? So it was based on Money Follows the Person, actually. So like if Bill shows up, you can get money from the program that we called was SSYI. You can get money from SSYI for Bill. If Bill doesn't show up, you don't get money, right? So what that meant, though, right, is that we had a list of young people that we were trying to connect with, that we knew to drive violent acts or commit violent acts rather, and we connected with some and not with others. And so in a randomized control trial, what we were able to do was say, for the young people we successfully connected with, what were the outcomes? And for those who we didn't, which is a smaller proportion, but still a proportion, right, what were those outcomes? Because we can see them tripping flags in the system. And what we found in that case was, I think, a 40% drop in recidivism rates. So with that randomized control trial data, we were then able to say to the legislature, this is actually your best cost-saving program on the violence prevention front, right? We are dropping all your shootings, we're reducing hospital costs, we're reducing police and ER burden, and we are also dropping juvenile justice and correctional facility, right, and like yada, yada, yada. So at that point, when we were like, hey, if you give us $10 million a year, we can save you $20 million a year, people were like, okay, cool. I don't like, because of my political ideology, in case you haven't caught on, I don't like using the wallet as the incentive. I will. I think we should do stuff because it's what people need and we have enough money. But, right, like I have every piece of evidence in my career points to that if you listen to the people impacted and do what they ask, that you actually do wind up with a bananas more efficient system that saves a ton of money. And so that is always the strategy that started the conversation with funders. Yes?
Is there a better alternative to coordinated entry systems?
Oh, what an excellent question.
In cities like Los Angeles.
Oh, are you from LA?
Yeah.
Hey. Yes and no. So coordinated entry is important, but we should be moving away from coordinated entry through the VI SPDAT or a single assessment tool and to something called phased assessment. Are you familiar with phased assessment? So phased assessment is this model that actually is recommended by USICH where rather than saying like, here is our single assessment tool, right? And we use it everywhere. Phased assessment says, and I actually have in a different presentation, I talk about this, because what we hear from folks experiencing homelessness is like, hey, I came here to do laundry and they asked me about my childhood trauma. It didn't make any sense, it was offensive, and just for the record, came here to do laundry, right? And moreover, right, when we talk to providers, they're like, yeah, I'm asking this because it's mandated, but I don't provide behavioral health supports. I don't know what to do with this information when someone is like, I was molested at 11, right? Phased assessment is a model where you ask questions only when the service type behind those questions makes sense. So if you're showing up to do laundry, I actually don't gotta ask you nothing. Like at all, really, right? If you show up at a place that doesn't have connection to housing but provides behavioral health support, right? I could screen you with the Beck's Depression Inventory, right? It's a validated instrument. I know that it works. It's very short. Yada, yada, yada. You get where I'm going. The phased assessment model requires two things. One, that a community have really, really, really integrated data systems on the back end, because ideally what you want is to be able to have connectivity between service providers so that when someone says, I was here and I talked to you, and now I'm going here to talk to you, behavioral health is what both of you provide, you can ask me the same way that anyone who's middle class gets asked, right? Can you authorize me to look at your records, right? We do that all the time for rich people. Rich people never have to re-enter shit, because that would be too much work for us. We'd be really mad about it, right? But like the idea that we can just incessantly ask folks who are experiencing homelessness the same 4 questions over and over again, because like whatever, right? Or it's too hard to integrate these things. It's not too hard to integrate these things, we just don't wanna. So that's the first thing phased assessment requires. The second thing phased assessment requires is you do need to rethink your housing screening tool. And I cannot stress that enough. I'm on record as being suspicious of the SPDAT for a lot of reasons, but I think that like ultimately the theoretical construct that vulnerability is rotating on inside the VI SPDAT is a construct of physical ailment. It is not a construct of other kinds of vulnerability that we might see, like race, like gender, et cetera, et cetera. And so if we're going to think about, physical ailment is only one axis of vulnerability that might prioritize someone for permanent supportive housing. It does not indicate whether or not that person would do well in rapid. It does not indicate whether or not yada, 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 yada. So what we actually need to do if we're going to really do phased assessment is develop the screeners for each of those housing types and say, if you're at a program that does rapid, here are the 3 questions that are going to let me know whether or not this makes sense for you, and we'll talk blah, 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 blah. So that's work that needs to be done. But on most of these other service types, we actually do have validated instruments that we could move towards immediately, right? Because they're already used in primary care and medical settings, right? And that's most of what we're providing. Other question? I guess I've been doing this for a long time. Yeah?
What do you think about universal basic income?
What do I think about universal basic income? We should do it. There's no reason why we shouldn't do it. Oh my God, we should do it. And in fact, I'm a huge fan of tying universal basic income with reparations and saying everybody gets some money, and if you are black, brown, or come from a marginalized community, native, and you were the subject of a genocide in this country, you gonna get extra money, because we fucked up. Easiest question of the day, yes. Oh, my stars. I don't control any of the conferences. I get asked to talk at a lot of them, and I'm not in charge of them, and I know I'm supposed to say yes, and I do. And I also, I do legitimately think that it's important, right, that like we have an opportunity to come together as a field and like challenge ourselves or push ourselves. I also feel like most of the conferences don't do that. I feel like most of the time it's like, here's rapid rehousing for the 17th year in a row. No disrespect. I feel like Ian McClellan, do you remember when he was like, no disrespect to La La Land? Do you remember that moment? It was a brilliant moment. Someone was like, Ian McClellan, what do you think of La La Land? And he was like, or what do you think of the spate of musicals? And he goes, well, I mean, I think it's important that when you're in a musical, you know how to sing. No disrespect to La La Land. So no disrespect to anybody about rapid rehousing or talking about rapid rehousing. You know, I either want us to like do like small impactful things around the stuff that's actually going to push us, right? Or I just want us to, you know, maybe cease for a year. I don't have the budget or the power to make us stop for a year. The obstacles that I would face, right, are that like more and more as homelessness prevention and response migrates towards being an industry, right? These spaces become validating spaces for the work. And so in the, like a homelessness conference 15 years ago wasn't a thing. Like, people would have been like, you're doing what? Like, and now every state has one in addition to the 5 national conferences, right? And so like we've built this cottage industry around homelessness, and it's very difficult. And I recognize this as a person who like my work shaped the national scene through me talking at conferences. Like, so we have to figure out a better way, I think, to validate ourselves or get validation as a field so that we can get to that place. And right now, I think that like the systemic barriers that I would face if I was trying to get to a year of no conferences are like, you know, when we look at the big national conferences, they're at agencies that are run by essentially like the same 5 white folks, right? Who like that it's part of their thing, right? Is to like do conferences in this way. And again, I know them, they are friends of mine, I deeply respect them. But it would be a significant shift in the model that they've built to move away from that even for a year. And that would be hard because the incentive is to run that validation circuit every year so that we know that we're valid and we know that we're doing the right thing and we know da-da-da-da. And as opposed to if we were local and proximate and working with community, how would we know that we were doing the right thing, right? Who would tell us we were doing the right thing? We'd actually have to listen to the people that we're supposed to be working with as opposed to going to DC or, you know, going to California or wherever and having someone be like, yeah, I still think that's right and you should definitely go back to your community and keep doing it. Yeah.
Since I've been at my agency, we've almost do we make the staff feel appreciated? Now I'm like, oh, there was another conference. I still have to
Right,
work.
right,
But then it's like, I'm going to a conference.
right.
So how do we, besides paying the 75, and I can talk about it, I'll and maybe I won't get paid, I don't know, but I don't really got 77. Either way, what kind of incentives are you offering your staff? Like,
Yeah.
what's helping you reduce staff turnover?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my staff, we don't pay for our benefits at all. The firm covers benefits entirely. We designed our hierarchy in a non-hierarchy, so we're flat, meaning that there is, I talked about this morning, but there's not significant salary discrepancy, right? So we actually look at functions and say, is your job integral to the performance of the agency? And if the answer is yes, we pay you like it is, right? And what I understand is that, so I have a special assistant, his name is Andrew. I would be literally dead if it weren't for Andrew. Like, he makes sure that like me and like our teams can like be in places and do things in ways that like I assume he might be some sort of magical creature. I'm not sure. And I pay him well over 70 because, right, like his job is as integral to the agency as my job is. And so we shouldn't see massive discrepancies in salaries unless someone is literally like, this is kind of, we're doing this because like we like you, but you ain't gonna be here, right? And frankly, like no one should be at an agency if that's what they're doing, right? Like we should have the jobs we need and not the jobs we don't. The other thing that I would say in terms of like incentivizing staff and not sort of saying like here's a conference as a way, right, is like build internal mechanisms to do like knowledge transfer and to do that kind of stuff. So like you can build communities of practice and communities of learning in your organization, right? So everybody has a skill. One of the things that we don't have time to do right now, but I've been talking about for a while, is like having enough time for people to each teach a seminar each quarter, right? So like to have someone be like, hey, like I'm teaching the seminar on queer theory, right? Like, or I'm teaching the seminar, but like, just like, let's like actually get into the stuff that we know and like lean into each other in that way. I also am in the process of implementing a vacation bonus where if you take your vacation and completely disconnect, you get a bonus for that. So what that means though, right, is like I don't want to see you respond to an email. I don't want to see you text me. I don't want to see you on Slack. You have to completely disconnect for the entirety of the time that you're supposed to be off, and it has to be at least a week in order for you to qualify for the bonus. That's how I use that money instead of going to conferences. I mean, it's just what you design for what you want to see, right? If I want a well-rested staff that ain't killing each other, I need them to take a break. Any other questions? Yeah.
I work in an agency that does intervention for domestic violence.
Yeah.
And the whole concept of a vulnerability scale.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if anyone has done research to see what is the impact of vulnerability scales on child custody.
Yeah.
Because the main reason why many women stay in abusive relationships is because they've been threatened with losing their children if they leave.
Yep.
And people do make efforts to
Yeah.
pay that forward.
Yep.
That's one of my major concerns. Has anyone looked at that in the places where vulnerability scales have been
No,
in place?
my understanding is that no one has. I will say that, and again, this is in a separate talk, but one of the things that we found as a core driver of homelessness for women of color was intimate partner and domestic violence, right? One of the things that I've actually been working with some of the national DVTA providers on this is what we understand about communities of color and women of color trans women of color is that they don't report violence often for fear of CPS or just the police, right? Like it is, and so oftentimes what we hear from those communities is we need a violence interruption strategy that promotes safety and also isn't going to incarcerate anyone in our community or steal children. And I again, when I think about like what does it mean to like listen to people and respond with what they ask for, because I think at the core of what you just said, right, which is like there's a vulnerability embedded in how systems respond to people, not necessarily in people themselves, right? And so I think it would be really important for us to design those violence intervention strategies where people can call 911 and the police don't come, but it's some other kind of intervention, right? Or, when we hear from communities of color, I do not want my partner incarcerated. I need you to work with him or them or, whatever in the community. That has been a request for years at this point, and we have not honored that request. And I think that if we really want to see a shift in the number of women of color flowing into homelessness as a direct result of IPV, then we do need to be able to engage differently with perpetrators and engage differently beyond activating CPS or the carceral system. Thanks. I think we have time for one or two more, depending on there. Yeah?
When you were actually presenting at the beginning, it sounded almost like we have to change the Constitution, the Constitution. So, with that approach in mind, which is what I actually had in mind when I actually heard the whole thing, it was institutional, it was created, in those days when women were not taken into account, black people were not taken into account, brown people were taken into account. So somehow I was actually looking for a system that has to be changed from the top to the bottom.
Yeah, so,
Actually discuss that. We became more specific.
yeah. We became more specific because I want you all to be able to leave and do something, right? And I don't want you to leave thinking that the only way to address this is to change the Constitution, although I would like to change the Constitution. But I want everyone in this room to understand that the power that they hold, and that even if you are just a case manager, you're still a gatekeeper, right? And you still have a power that someone is looking at you and saying, like, I don't have that power, right? And so I need us to collectively humble ourselves, right, and listen to people. I don't disagree. I would love to change the Constitution. And I do think, right, that at the end of the day, when I think about like what listening to people does as an exercise, is it transfers power. And so thank you for saying this, because I meant to talk about this. When we listen to people and genuinely put our skills in service of them, we give them power, right? Not empowerment, we give power, right? And so a system that is designed to listen over time naturally transfers its power to those it is listening to. And so if we do this institutionally, right, we could have very different government organizations, very different government institutions if we built in listening. And I know, again, it feels like very like, oh, it's just listening, but like really, it turns out it's super hard. Just try to listen to your partner when they're yelling at you. My partner doesn't yell. Yeah.
Just in terms of lessons learned and thoughts, I guess just in terms of nonprofit management and how they are managed, I guess I'm thinking of board of directors and how they relate to those in power and just like how much direction they may have over organizations, but then being, I don't know, they're being educated by those in power, right? Like not necessarily those that the organization serves and those that work within the organizations at all levels. And so I'm just wondering, if you have thoughts on alternatives to nonprofit management or how that is implemented.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of what I was talking about this morning when I was saying, like, we design these organizations with command control structure, but command control structure is for emergency response and like military functions, right? It actually doesn't make sense in a lot of other management structures. And so we need to actually take a full step back, right? And all this money that goes in strategic planning, I would love some of it to go into organizational design, and to have folks come in, like good OD folks, and come in and say, what are the functions? How might these functions be performed, right, in a way that doesn't default to this sort of hierarchy and default to this, like you have this person who's in charge, and then these people report to them, and they have a lot of power, and then on, right? And then the other thing I would say is that it's really important that like people who are in whatever the final power position is spend time not just hanging out with other people who are in the final power position, right? And I know that again sounds super Pollyannish, but recently I was chatting with someone who runs a really large system for a very major city, and they were talking about how they have recently begun to spend at least one day a week shadowing a different kind of frontline staff. So they'll shadow a benefits administrator, they will shadow a case manager, they will shadow an outreach worker, and they literally just like follow quietly. Like they're not like, they're like, and as the director, and they talked about, when we were having this conversation, they talked so beautifully and so elegantly about like the things that they were learning, right? And that like literally in an interaction, after they watched an interaction and then they turned to this case manager and they said like, why did you do that? And the case manager said, your policies make me ask those questions, so I do it every time because I have to. And they literally were able to then go back to their office and be like, are we doing this? Right? So, like, I really think that, like, you know, find a day, if you are a leader, find a day that you dedicate to doing, not work, but being in the community, being with folks who are not in those leadership positions. And if you have a pot of money for strategic planning and you're like, what am I going to strategize about this year, right? Strategize about your organizational design. Do you need the structure that you defaulted into because that's how we were told we have to run stuff? I think I'm out of time. Thank you.